Okay, so Future Ready Homes is the name of the project that I'm running in Shropshire. It's funded by Energy Redress, and it is all about retrofit. It's all about making significant energy efficiency and carbon saving improvements in the home. So be that by reducing your electricity demand, reducing your heating demand by substantial insulation, or getting your home off fossil fuels for heating, or for having home renewables. So we're huge fans of retrofit. We are hoping to see demand increase enormously and capacity increase enormously. We're engaging with installers and contractors to try and get them trained up, get them more involved in doing retrofit works, and of course increase people's knowledge about retrofit, hopefully get rid of some of the fear factor, which is why we're here today. We're doing a series of webinars in conjunction with HGN. So yeah, there'll be lots more webinars coming, so do keep an eye out for them. So we're trying to educate a bit. We're going to lots of events to engage with people, talk to them about retrofit. I'm delighted to say, as part of that, we have acquired an electric van, a fully electric van, which we're kitting out with insulation and all sorts of lovely, interesting stuff. And of course, a heat pump, a demo heat pump, will be in the van, so that it's sort of an exhibition kit on wheels, which will be going out to events next spring and summer. So that should be fun. We've been running Green Doors events, which Jackie's mentioned. Some of you may have been out around Shropshire on Saturday. So we had 20 homes involved in Green Doors around Shropshire, which was great. And we're hoping to do a skills cafe at some point, which will give you a chance to actually try things for yourself, have a go at maybe some internal wall insulation, something like that, if you fancy a bit of DIY. So lots of events, lots of things going on that we hope you'll find useful and interesting. We've also got a limited number of energy efficiency surveys that we're doing on people's homes. The idea being to create a retrofit plan, so that you have an idea of what sort of works to do to your house in what stages and what it might cost. So if you'd like to apply to be one of the homeowners who has that, then if you just Google Future Ready Homes, you will find, you should find, depending on where you live, the Marches Energy Agency, who I work for, are covering Shropshire, and our partners, who you can see on the slide here, 7Y Energy Agency, they're covering Herefordshire and Powys. So the project, the Future Ready Homes project, covers the whole of the Marches area. And we're delighted to have some of the wonderful dynamic green groups in the area also helping us out. So Lightfoot are busy in Powys, Zero Carbon Shropshire, obviously in Shropshire, and HGN, who do great work in Herefordshire. So that's all about Future Ready Homes, and I'll hand back to the wonderful and dynamic Jackie Jones.
Thank you very much, Tony. And yeah, I know quite a lot of people have joined us since we made our start. So yeah, I'm Jackie Jones from Herefordshire Green Network, and we're very pleased to be hosting this this event on behalf of Future Ready Homes. So I realise that quite a lot of people may still have their cameras on. You're very welcome to turn your camera off, and it might actually make things work a bit slicker. Anyhow, I'll stop sharing this screen now because we've got something else. We're not going to be able to hear from all of you, but what we can do, I mean, until we get to the Q&A to do introductions, but what we can do is some polling. Now, Gemma, I want you to be alert. I just had one of those lovely messages that people love to get when they're hosting webinars saying your internet connection's unstable. So if you lose me, don't worry, I'll be back, I think. So we've got a couple of questions to ask you now about heat pumps and you. Here we go. you should be able to see that now. So what would be nice would be if you could answer the first question, which is, which of these applies to you? I have a heat pump already. I'm thinking of getting a heat pump. I'm just curious. And I'm a heating professional, because I know we have got some professionals on board. And then you can scroll down, or being well, to the second question, which is, what main form of heating either have you switched from or would you be switching from? And that's mains gas. And here we are in Herefordshire, I think 45% of people are not on mains gas. LPG, oil, storage radiators, an Arga or Rayburn as the main heat source, or open fires, wood burning stove. And I realise Argas or Rayburn probably run on some of those other fuels.
Almost all done.
Almost all done?
A couple more to go.
Lovely. Okay, well, I don't think you can just see the full answers, but I can read them. So 27% of people on the call have a heat pump already. 40% are thinking of getting one. 20% are just curious. And 13%, which is 6 people at the moment, are heating professionals. And 44% would be switching or have switched from mains gas, 9% from LPG, 33% from oil, 2% from storage radiators. Nobody's ticked Arga or Rayburn, 11% from open fires or wood burning stoves, solid wood stoves. So I think we now get to see the little graph. Which unfortunately won't be recorded, which is why I read out the numbers. Grand. So now we get to hear from the experts. I'm very pleased that we're going to be hearing from Leah Felgate from Daikin, and 2 of her colleagues. They're going to give us a presentation, and then they'll take your questions. And just in case anybody's wondering, that we've asked Daikin to present because they work in our area. They've got a training centre in the Marches, which is where we're based. But this, of course, is not an endorsement or a recommendation of their products particularly. Just in case you're wondering, no, we have not received any payment from Daikin for this. And of course, we won't be sharing your addresses with them or with anybody else. Lovely. In that case, may I hand over to Leah?
Thank you, Jackie. Okay.
And before you start, I just want to say, everybody, we will be keeping you muted. So if you are one of the speakers, please remember to unmute before you get going. Thank you.
Okay. Brilliant. Thank you everybody for joining today. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day. So today we just want to give you a bit of an introduction as to who Dakin are and the low carbon heating solutions. How does a heat pump work? And then my colleague Nick will go through some typical running costs, some of the myths, and also the boiler upgrade scheme. And then we'll also touch on some of the Dakin products and support available for you locally via the Sustainable Home Centres. Okay, so you've got myself, Leah Falgate. My role is specification sales engineer for Dakin. So I cover all of the East and West Midlands, and predominantly my customer base is social housing and new build. And then we've got Nick Huston, who's Future Energy Business Manager, and Doug Wilson, who is our installer sales engineer. Okay, so just to give you very top level who are Dakin, you might not have come across us before unless you work in the commercial sector, or you've got some of our products in your office space. So we're actually a Japanese company, so we're actually part of Dakin Europe, so we're a worldwide business. And actually, a lot of people think heat pumps are new. Obviously, it's really good to see those figures that quite a lot of you have, I think it was 25%, Jackie, have already got a heat pump, which is fantastic. So we'd love to get your feedback. But heat pumps aren't a new thing. The first packaged heat pump was developed in 1951 by Dakin. So it is a technology that's ever evolving, but it has been around for a very long time. And the first heat pump was actually installed in the UK in 2005. So it is something that's been around for a long time. It's just something that's fairly new, let's say, to the UK housing market. So we've got UK manufacturing facilities all across Europe, and that's actually growing over the next couple of years to keep up with the demand for the UK market. We've also got warehouse in Kent and Manchester that feed into our sustainable home centres for stock. And we're Europe's #1 player in the air conditioning and heat pump market. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of a snapshot of where we are at the moment UK-wide across all of the heat pump manufacturers, so that's not just Dakin. This is just to give you an idea of the growth of the heat pump installations over the last few years and where we're projected to be going over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. So as you can see there from those numbers, it is pretty much doubling year upon year. So at the moment for 2022, we're projected to be 116,000. I think at the moment, Dakin are sort of alone just 20,000 of that. So that's pretty high volume considering the number of heat pump manufacturers there are. Now the government has set a target for 600,000 heat pumps a year by 2028. So we're well on the way to that if we carry on doubling our market growth over the next couple of years. Okay. So just wanted to give you a little bit of an insight into how does a heat pump work. So I'm sure for those of you that have already got one, you'll pretty much be aware of this already. But it is fairly simple. So if you look at the diagram on the screen, so number one, you've got your air source heat pump located outside of the building. That will take the air from the outside to heat it into a liquid refrigerant. So the air outside doesn't have to be warm air. The heat pump can work down to -25 degrees. So the idea is that it's taking energy out of that air and then converting it into heat to heat your home. So using the electricity, the heat pump will compress the liquid to increase its temperature, and this then condenses back into a liquid to be released as the stored heat. That then goes into your house and is used for the stored water in your cylinder and for the heat to heat your radiators. So on the inside, it is very much the same process that you'd normally find with a gas or an oil boiler or whatever heat source you use for a wet system. Okay. So there's two types of heat pump that you might find out on the market, and we're purely just looking at air to water heat pumps today, which is your typical wet system that you would have with radiators and cylinders in your domestic property. So the first type is a split system. Now this is what you call a true heat pump and where it actually originated from. So the refrigerant pipework, so the refrigerant is the pipework there that you can see in the green. So this is what we mentioned before on the previous slide, actually transmits the heat from the heat pump compressor into the heating system. So the split system has an outdoor unit and then a hydro box. So the refrigerant pipework is carried from outside to inside. That then goes into your heating system the same as it would with any other type of product. So the specialist with this technology is you need to have an F-gas qualified installer. So this is something that you find in the commercial world with air conditioning systems. So it's very much the same. So you need to have a specialist to install this type of product. The benefit of this is you do have more flexibility with installation and the locations. The pipework can be a lot smaller with a refrigerant split system. The other type of system is a monoblock system. So what this means is you have one outdoor unit and then inside you have a domestic hot water cylinder. So all of the hydraulics, so the hydro box that we mentioned on the split unit, is all in the outdoor unit. So all of the refrigeration is completely sealed. That work has already been done inside our factory. So the installer doesn't have to tamper with that at all. So the benefit of that is that the installer doesn't have to have F-gas qualification. So from an installer's point of view, this is very much a plug and play, a flow and return installation job, which does make it a lot easier to find an installer out there that is available to do this type of work. This type of heat pump is suitable for traditional heating system. Potentially some of the drawbacks might be that you're limited with how far you can put the heat pump compared to the split system, and the pipework might need to be a little bit bigger on this particular system. Just to give you an idea, I would probably say 80% of our, not just Dakin, but across all of the heat pump manufacturers, so those figures that we showed you before, probably 80% of those are monoblock. And that is the trend that we're seeing in the UK at the moment as we sort of migrate from other fossil fuels over to heat pumps, is that it's the most cost effective and easy to install type of product for your typical heating installer to be able to fit. Obviously, we mentioned the split system is more of a specialist product, and you need an F-gas qualified installer. So that's why we're seeing more of a shift towards the monoblock. Okay, so I'm now going to hand you over to Nick, who's going to go through with you some of the heat pump myths, some typical running cost comparisons, and also the boiler upgrade scheme.
Thanks, Leah, and welcome everybody. Yeah, I'm just going to go through some sort of typical myths. So I work with a lot of organisations around the sort of heat pump journey and trying to raise awareness. And these are the kind of questions that I've received myself over the past few months and years. So I just wanted to share them and just give you a flavour of the kind of questions that people are asking out there. So the first is just that heat pumps are too technical and difficult to install. It's a question I've been asked quite a lot. As Leah's just touched on there, they are very easy to install these days. They have moved on quite a lot in the last sort of 10 or 15 years. One of the big changes that Leah's just shown on that last slide was that we've moved away from those refrigerant pipes into just normal water connections. And it's quite a small change. What that means is that it's a lot easier to install heat pumps by installers. So we've made that sort of install process a lot easier. You don't need that refrigerant qualification, and the work itself can be done a lot quicker. So that's quite a significant change in terms of making them a lot easier to install. And they're really not that technical at all. I mean, they've got that outside unit, the sort of heat pump on the outside of the building, but in turn you've got sort of normal pipework, normal radiators, fairly normal heating controls. So there is certainly a different technology, but they're not anything that's too difficult or too technical. They're just sort of not as mainstream as sort of gas boilers are. And then residents won't understand how to use them. It's another sort of question I've got. And again, they're not that they're difficult to understand. They're just different. So the big change with heat pumps compared to gas boilers is that heat pumps generally need to be left on sort of tick over during the day. They won't heat a property up as quickly as a gas boiler would in the past. So they do tend to have to be left on at a sort of fairly low, sort of moderate temperature, and then sort of boosted up in the morning and evening. So that's the sort of biggest change, behavioural change needed to understand how to sort of use and control heat pumps. But the controls themselves that go in the hallway are very simple control. I think Leah's got a slide later on just to show what they look like. But yeah, they're very much just up and down, on and off with a boost function. So they're quite simple controls to use. But on certainly on the schemes that we work with, we do spend a lot of time talking to residents and just beforehand just explain sort of what heat pumps are, how they work, how they're different to a gas boiler or like an oil system. Just so you've got that fairly good level of understanding of how they're sort of different. But yeah, they're certainly not difficult to understand. And then difficult to control. So yeah, as I just touched on, that we do sort of fit what we've sort of called a simplified controller. So we tend to sort of fit almost like two controls. One is your sort of usually programmer, where you've got a control where you put all your settings into, and you can fit it on sort of holiday mode and day and night, and have a lot of controls, which we've got the same on our kind of system as you would a gas boiler. And then we've got this second simplified one I've just mentioned, which will go in the hallway, which has just got a base screen with a number on it, which shows the current temperature. And you can boost it up and down as you need to. So they are very easy to control. We tend to sort of set them up when they're installed to sort of be like an optimum efficiency. So that just means they're all sort of set up. They'll come on and off all day long as they need to, just to maintain that good level of comfort. And if you need to change the settings, you can do quite easily. But yeah, they're certainly not difficult to control at all. And then planning. This is another question or another query I get asked a fair bit. And again, 5-10 years ago, there was a little bit of an issue with planning just because there weren't that mainstream, and a lot of planning organisations and planning teams didn't really know what heat pumps were. A few years back, we had something called permitted development. And what this means within planning is that heat pumps are now allowed to be installed without having full planning permission. So permitted development does capture all the sort of normal, straightforward heat pump installs without having to go through any kind of planning regulation or application or process at all. That's quite a big change, and that just means that the planning departments are very happy with heat pumps as a rule. And the only thing that would sort of fall outside of permitted development is if the building is like a listed building, or if it's in a conservation area, or if you have like, for example, like a group of terrace properties that are very close together. Sometimes you can have sort of neighbouring windows that are quite close, and sometimes you've got to be a little bit careful on sort of like noise transfer. But that aside, I'd say 90% of all installs are just done through normal permitted development, so you wouldn't have any issues at all with planning. Next slide, Leah.
We lost Leah.
Yeah. Just need the next slide.
I am here. I'm just trying to get it to move across, but you seem to have frozen.
You might need to reshare, Leah.
I'll just try resharing it. There we go. Right, brilliant. So we're back. Sorry about that little technical hitch. Yeah, disruption for residents is quite a key one, and it's quite important to sort of show how it differs from a sort of normal heat and replacement scheme. So essentially, if you're having a heat pump installed, and there's quite a few people on this call have had them, so that'd be good to sort of share some of those stories. But installs can take anything from around sort of 2 days to sort of 3 days as a general rule. I would say day one's probably the most disruptive in terms of removing whatever heating system's there already. So if it's storage heaters that have got to come out, that can be fairly messy. If it's an old sort of solid fuel cold system, that can be particularly messy. And then really they're just starting to install the new system. So the heat pump will go on the outside, and then if you happen to have any radiators and pipework, there'll be a fair bit of work in sort of most rooms running the pipeworks around the building and the property. But installers are pretty experienced these days in doing heat pump installs, and the ones that I've seen are sort of very good. They've got lots of dust sheets down. They tend to have a hoover with them in the van these days to sort of hoover up afterwards. And they certainly wouldn't leave anybody without heating it. So the way they do the install is that they'll pretty much spend day one taking it out and getting all the new pipework and radiators set up. And then day two, they'll probably do the switch over. So they'll turn off the old system and put the new system on. So that wouldn't happen to leave any there'd be no period of time without any sort of heating systems. So yeah, this disruption's very much like minimized and controlled. And then this last one's quite an interesting one, because I get asked to do heat pumps work best when replacing off-gas heating systems. And I've got a few slides coming up which just show the difference. So historically, yeah, heat pumps have certainly worked better from a running cost point of view when taking out off-gas heating systems. So whether it's oil or solid fuel or electric, just because the energy savings have been much more clear. And we've been in a bit of a strange cycle with energy bills, which I'll come to in a second, over the past few years. And there was a point in time when electricity was 5 times higher than gas. So what that meant was that even though heat pumps are 3 or 4 times more efficient than the gas boiler, if your energy bill, if your electricity costs are so much higher, then it's difficult to justify replacing a gas boiler with a heat pump. Up to now, that is. So yeah, historically, there's been much more of a case to replace off-gas heating systems, but yeah, we've seen quite a big shift just in the last 6 months, and the next few slides should demonstrate that for you. Next slide, Leah. I think slides, is it?
Apologies, it seems to be causing me a problem again.
Right, so there's quite a bit of data on this slide, so let's try and break it down a bit for you. So I get asked a lot about runner costs for heat pumps, and it's probably fair to say it's been quite a difficult question to answer over the past couple of years, because really to work out what the running cost of any kind of heating system is, it's really much based on a few things. One is obviously how people use the energy in the home, but secondly, probably more importantly, is what price you paid for that energy, and then thirdly, how efficient the heating system is. So we can actually look at two of those sort of factors. We're going to look quite closely at the sort of tariff levels, the energy costs, and also the efficiencies, and it'll give us a fair idea of what the running cost is for heat pumps compared to different technologies. So gas boilers generally, as a rule, sort of classed as about 90% efficient based on like a 10-year-old boiler. If it's a newer boiler, it's probably going to be closer to sort of 96, 97% efficient. If it's a very old 25-year-old boiler, it's probably going to be around about 60% efficient. So, but as just for sort of comparisons and try and be fair, I've set it at 90% efficient. Storage heaters, come back one. Storage heaters generally 100% efficient, even though some of the very old storage heaters are difficult to control. You've got to almost predict the weather the next day by working out how much heat you're going to need, so you can draw that heat down through the night. But they are sort of classed as like 100% efficient. You do get every pound you put in theory, you get a pound back out at the other end. It's just not always exactly how and when you want it. And then heat pumps are around sort of 360% efficient. I'm not going to bore you today, but I've got all sorts of charts and diagrams which show how that sort of 360% is calculated. But as a sort of general rule, a standard heat pump install with a standard monoblock system would be at that sort of 360% efficient. And then you could apply those efficiencies to the price caps. So I've put down 3 different price caps here just to show you the journey that we've been on. So prior to the 1st of October, from the 1st of April, we had quite a large price cap increase. So you remember in the press, we had a lot of talk and commentary about energy bills going up by 80%, and that's true. So at the time, it was talked about being like £1,900 for an average energy bill, and that increased from around about £1,200. So it was quite a big increase. And what that £1,900 meant in terms of tariffs was 7 pence for gas and 28 pence for electric. And then the proposed price cap, I say proposed because this is before the sort of introduction of the Prime Minister's new energy price guarantee, was that it was going to virtually double up to 14 pence for gas and 51 for electric. So everybody's average household bills would be around 3,500, which would have been pretty serious and pretty catastrophic in terms of energy bills and cost of living crisis. And then we had the new sort of intervention really from the Prime Minister, almost like a first week in a job. Liz Truss announced that we're going to have a new price cap on the 1st of October. So just a week or so into that. And that price cap is going to be 10 pence for gas and 34 for electric. And this is the sort of 2,500 average household cost I would have seen in the press. That 2,500 is really like an average across the country. So it depends on what kind of property type you've got. If you've got a big detached house, you'd be paid a lot more than 2,500. And likewise, if you've got a smaller bungalow or flat, it'd be a lot less than that. But so this 10 pence and 34 pence is really the sort of the tariffs that we're talking about. So just to compare those tariff levels with storage heaters and gas boilers and heat pumps. So this is where you can make little adjustments on the efficiencies. So for storage heaters, we're going to be paying 28 pence. You don't have to make any adjustments at all. So on a typical house of using 12,000 kilowatt hours, the annual cost would be about £3,400 to run the heating system. Gas boilers, if they run at 90%, you can adjust that sort of 7 pence up to about 8 pence, and it works out about £979 a year for gas boilers. Then heat pumps, even though you're paying more for the electric rather than gas, you're paying 28 pence, because you're getting 360% efficiency. That actually drives that price down to just under 8 pence, or 7.87, because you're getting sort of 3.6 times. So every pound you put in, you get 3.60 back out. So what that shows really is that to run a heat pump compared to a gas boiler is slightly less. Now, this was based on the sort of pre-October price cap. So it showed that the saving would be about 3.5%, which isn't a great deal, to be honest. I'll show you the sort of trend of what was going to happen in the next couple of slides. Let's see if this switches there. Yeah, so this is one that was superseded, but this is what it was going to look like. So these were the very high tariff levels of 14 pence and 51 pence. And you would have had some really very high energy bills for all three, really, but especially storage heaters over £6,000. And the key figure there is the one on the end, the sort of 12%. So heat pumps were now sort of growing to 12% cheaper than gas boilers. But that was superseded by this next slide. Just change it over later. This is what actually happens. This is the sort of new tariff levels of 10 pence and 34 pence. And again, it's interesting to see the sort of last figure in the box there of 17.5%. So what's actually happened is government are making heat pumps more cheaper to run than gas boilers. And they're doing that by narrowing the what we call like the price gap between gas and electric. So I mentioned before that not so long ago, electricity was 5 times higher than gas. Now it's just over 3 times. So the gap's really, really narrowed. And what that means is that when you're looking at a heat pump that's 3.6 or 360% efficient, it's starting to stack up a lot better than it did a year ago. So really, we can safely say that taking out a gas boiler and putting a heat pump in will reduce your energy bills. There's obviously a few disclaimers on that. We have to make sure that the heat pumps are like well designed and properly installed, and we need to make sure that we get the education right and talk to people about how to use them properly and how they should be set up. But certainly from a sort of efficiency and tariff level point of view, we can demonstrate that heat pumps are certainly cheaper to run than a gas boiler, which is good to see. So next slide, Leah. So yeah, just to summarize that really. So yeah, off-gas electric storage heaters have always been sort of fairly expensive to run. We had a question recently about being able to use like sort of economy 7 kind of tariffs, which was a good point. So yeah, in theory, if you had an economy 7 tariff, you wouldn't necessarily be paying 28 pence for your electric. You'd be paying probably half that through the night, but during the day you'd be paying probably double that. But really, we've seen an end of the old sort of economy 7 and economy 10 tariffs. So there might still be a few out there left that are on fixed rate deals, but generally none of the energy suppliers now are offering those kind of economy 7 tariffs where you've got like a really clear day and night. What we are going to see in the next few months is what's called time of use tariffs. And this is a sort of more modern version of the economy 7 day and night tariffs, where we're going to have off-peak and on-peak times, but they'll not be so strict as it'll be 6 hours through the night, it'll be off-peak, and the rest will be on-peak. It'll be literally through the day and night. We'll have certain times when electricity is a lot cheaper to buy, and it won't always be day and night. It could have during the day, it could be some periods where the energy will be cheap to buy. And really we can benefit those cheap tariffs by having a heat pump that's like smart connected. So all the new Dakin heat pumps are smart connected. We can really benefit from those on and off tariffs. So it could mean, for example, that if we've got to use the heat pump to heat the hot water cylinder up, we could do that exactly when the energy companies are telling us is the cheapest time to do it. So if they say between 2 and 4 in the morning, for example, that you can have half the tariff, for example, 50% saving, we'll just change the settings to do that. And then gas boilers. So as I mentioned, it's been very difficult to justify in the past because of this gap between gas and electrics being quite high. We're now down to 3.3, so just over 3 times higher. So that's quite a big difference. As I mentioned, it is important to get these heat pumps designed and installed properly. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, I've just put the slide in just to show the importance of insulation. So because, I mean, the big reason heat pumps differ from a gas boiler is that historically gas boilers have tended to be oversized, and you haven't had to worry too much about what the property construction is or what the levels of insulation in the property is, because the gas boiler will cover everything and a bit more. And it didn't really matter in the past because gas was fairly cheap energy. It didn't cost a great deal, so we didn't really worry too much if we're all sort of putting the gas boiler on, heating the home up very quickly. It got really hot, so I had to turn the gas boiler off, open a few windows, and then in the evening we might run a bath. To run the bath, you've got to put cold water in as well as hot water because the hot water is too hot, and that's just overheating. With a heat pump, you don't do any of that. It's designed for exactly what that building and the property needs. So it's you get your most efficiencies by sort of matching up exactly what the demand of the property is compared to what the heat pump can do. And this slide here just demonstrates the importance of making sure the property is fairly well insulated still, because if it's not well insulated, all that renewable heat you're going to be generating is just going to escape pretty quickly. And you would have to sort of fit a larger heat pump. So these two scenarios just demonstrate that. So scenario one, they're both exactly the same semi-detached properties. Scenario one's got an unfilled cavity, so they've got no insulation between the sort of cavity walls, the outside and inside walls, where scenario two is being filled. Property number one's got single glazed and the other one's got double glazed. One's got very little loft insulation and one's got sort of maxed out on loft insulation. And then the two figures at the bottom show the level of heat loss. So that's how much heat's escaping from the building, from the property. And 10.02 is pretty high heat loss compared to 4.72. What that would actually mean when you come to put a heat pump in is that we've got heat pumps that come in different sizes. So we would probably fit a heat pump that's sort of 5 or 6 kilowatts for scenario two. But for the first one, we'd have to fit a much, much larger heat pump, probably an 11 kilowatt heat pump. So straight away, you're putting a bigger heat pump in. That's probably a little bit less efficient. It probably costs more to install. So yeah, so you really got it is important to try and get at least the basic insulation levels right in terms of windows, cavities and lofts when you're looking at sort of designing a heat pump. Next slide, please. Yeah. Yeah, boiler upgrade scheme. So this is there's actually a lot of funding out there at the moment. So what government are doing is there's a really big push to try and reduce the UK's carbon emission targets. So all the sort of climate change levies and government talk at the moment about reducing carbon is sort of backed by some serious government policies and strategies at the moment, and also some very serious funding. So just last week, they launched a £1.5 billion scheme aimed at sort of local authorities and housing associations to try and reduce their carbon emissions across housing stock across the country. So we're talking about billions of pounds worth of investment for those kind of organisations, for local authorities and housing associations. For households, so for people like me and you, obviously it's difficult for us to access those kind of very large government funds, but what they've introduced is a scheme called the Boiler Upgrade Scheme, or like BUS for short. And this is pretty much available to anybody across the country. And unlike some of the government schemes, there's no restrictions on the property's got to be a certain EPC band, or you've got to be earning a certain level of income or less rather. There's no like benefit restrictions. Pretty much this is available to everybody. And what it is, it's a flat rate £5,000 grant, which you can access quite easily to offset the cost of the heat pump install. So pretty much anybody can access this fairly easily. It's quite a change from the previous scheme, which was called the Renewable Heat Incentive, which you might have come across. So that was where they had payments based over 7 years. This is an upfront flat rate grant. So it's a 3-year program, so we're just halfway through the first year. But there's still plenty of funding left to access this. And the process is fairly easy. You would just decide you want to have a heat pump. You would contact one of our Dakin installers. They would come out and give you a quote for the work. And then the installer would actually make the application on your behalf. Then they would access the £5,000 on your behalf, and they would just deduct that from the invoice. So if you're looking at an install of say £9,000, they would take the £5,000 off and just invoice you for the rest. So it's a fairly sort of straightforward process that pretty much anybody can access. And then next slide, Leah. I'll just hand back to you actually for these ones.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nick. That was really useful. Just wanted to finish off just by giving you a bit of a snapshot of the type of product that is available on the market today. And I've already read some of the questions, so I might be able to sort of answer some of the questions with this little bit as well. So what you can see on the screen, this is our latest model of the monoblock. So I think we're on series 3 now of this this particular product. So I'll just go through some of the highlights for you and the types of things just to give you a bit of an insight. So this model can actually go up to 60 degrees water temperature, so it's still classed as a low temperature monoblock. So with a heat pump, we're looking at working on lower temperatures to what you would have with your gas boiler, but actually we can still now achieve up to 60 degrees, which is really good news to be able to do that. However, we still would sort of recommend sort of between sort of 45 and 55, which I think we're generally all starting to do anyway, regardless of the heat source we've got, to try and reduce carbon and energy bills. Already mentioned before, so the heat pumps can operate down to -25. So I think it's safe to say with the areas that we're covering, we're not going to have any issues with that. All it will happen is that the heat pump does have to work a bit harder in those winter months. The design is a little bit more compact, a little bit more stylish. So we are getting there with the design, moving away from more of a commercial looking product. The one that you can see on the screen is actually mounted on some feet, but I did see in one of the questions somebody asked, if you haven't got access to a garden, what can you do? Really good question. You can actually wall mount the units as well, so that's not a problem, or you could put them on a roof space, but they do need to be located outside. The good thing with this product is you can now go up to 30 meters away from your indoor cylinder, so you can put them behind the garage, down the bottom of the garden, you know, wherever it is suitable, and that's part of what we or any other heat pump manufacturer would do when we go through that site survey and design service with you to look at the options of locations with you, and then we would work backwards from that to make sure that you've got the right fit product for the space available. So there are some options to be flexible there. So we've made this unit a lot easier to install, so there's no separate wiring. So for an installer's point of view, it is a lot easier to fit. Extremely quiet, sound power 52 decibels, and we do actually have a quiet mode function on this particular product, and sound is something that does come up, so I'd really love to get the feedback from some of you on the call that have got the heat pump as to what you think of the noise. But we have built in some extra functions. What that does mean though is if you do put the unit into quiet mode, it will take longer to heat your house because the fan has to slow down. So there is a lot of physics, as you'll see when it comes to heat pumps, about the way things work, and there's always a bit of a trade-off in terms of performance as well. You know, if you have higher temperatures, or you turn the fan down because of wanting to reduce the noise. So there's always a trade-off, but there's definitely lots of different options as to how you can run the heat pump to suit you. Okay, just wanted to touch on controls, and more so just to sort of highlight the differences as to how you would control your heat pump to how you would use a typical gas central heating system. So as you can see, we've got there your typical sort of modern room thermostat that you can buy with the unit, or you can buy with many products nowadays, and you can have the app on your phone and all that sort of stuff. So we have got all of that technology available. However, the key difference, although from the inside everything looks very similar, you've got radiators, thermostatic radiator valves, all of that sort of thing. What we do suggest, and what Nick has touched on as well, is that we want to try and avoid you know, setting schedules or turning things on and off. We want to try and set the desired temperature. We've got now 21, sort of probably anything between 18 and 23 as a maximum, whatever's comfortable for you. We want to set that, and then we want to leave it to do its thing. Bit like your fridge at home, it's kind of set, and then you don't have to do anything with it. You don't turn it off at night, you don't turn it up and down, you just let it do its thing. That's exactly the same with the heat pump. If we start to try and set time schedules or turn things on when we want them, it's going to take a long time for that heat pump to get your home warm or to heat up the water. So we need to let it do its thing, so that it's always there. And I think the key thing now, especially with energy prices, is to make sure that you're not making the heat pump work harder than you need it to. And the good thing is that a lot of us are starting to adopt some of these changes already, regardless of what type of heat source we've got in our home. We're all getting a little bit more savvy. We're turning down the flow temperatures, and we're changing the settings and turning things down. We're tweaking things a little bit, and that's fantastic. And that's all actually in terms of people's behaviours, getting people ready and used to the temperatures and the behaviours with using a heat pump as well. Okay, so just to finally touch on them, we just wanted to make you aware of some of the options that are available to you locally, and any next steps if anybody does want to talk to us any more about heat pumps. So we have got what we call sustainable home centres. So Dakin realised quite quickly, once we started to ramp up into the domestic market, that we needed to have a lot more presence. There's a lot more education required for homeowners and installers when it comes to heat pumps. So we've got what we call sustainable home centres, and they are a showroom. So they've got our equipment in, so you can come and have a look to see what a heat pump looks and feels like. They're also a training centre, so predominantly for engineers, but we'll also train, you know, social housing staff or anybody that's involved in a heat pump project. And they're also a trade counter as well, so they do sell our products. So it's a one-stop shop for you. And the two that we've got that are fairly local or cover your areas are Bell Plumbing Supplies, who are in Stourbridge and Worcester, and Farr and Harris, who are based in Shrewsbury. But they've also got the centre in Shrewsbury, but they've also got sites at Telford, and they go down to Ludlow as well. So they cover quite a vast area. And then just finally, so next steps then, so if you did want to talk to us or get a bit more information about heat pump, so you can visit one of our centres. If you get in touch with us, we can book an appointment for you to come in and have a look and have a chat to somebody there. We can send you over some brochures and some links to some YouTube videos. And I think YouTube is quite good as well, because we can send you a link to our YouTube where you can have a look at some videos about heat pumps, but then that will probably open you up to a lot more information in the world of YouTube from other sources outside of Dakin to help you with that journey. You can also go on our website and type in find an installer, and it will give you a list of approved Dakin installers in your area. And then if you wanted to, the next step then would be to arrange a site visit. So you don't need to worry about anything like that. We'll come out and we'll make sure that it's all sized and everything for you. And there's no obligation there at all. So all of that is completely free of charge if you did want any assistance, just to look into the options or the suitability of a heat pump for your home. And then just lastly, we do have an online selection tool that wasn't quite ready for today, but it is coming soon, so you can actually go online and you can answer some questions, and it will give you a rough idea of the type of heat pump and the estimated cost as well. So I'll share that with you when that's available. So just to wrap up, all of our details are there. So if you want to take a snapshot and you do want to get in touch with any of us after this, then please do. And I'll hand you back over to Tony, who's now going to go through the questions.
Thanks very much. Very informative, very interesting, and yeah, lots of good knowledge out there. People who've got heat pumps and people who haven't as well, asking some very interesting questions, which I will endeavour to take you through. I just wanted to clarify one thing quickly on the boiler upgrade scheme, which Nick mentioned. So it is, as he said, you'd apply for it through your installer, as the installer who applies for it on your behalf. It is pretty readily available, so an opportunity perhaps to make the most of. It's available to anybody who lives in England or Wales. You have to own the property, but it doesn't have to be the property you live in. If you're lucky enough to own a second home, or if you're a landlord and you have a rental, you can apply for that home. But the EPC thing, there's no eligibility in terms of the grade of the EPC. However, if your EPC's got any outstanding recommendations for cavity wall insulation or loft insulation, then you have to do those first. that's part of the government's recognition of the importance of fabric first. So that is there, but otherwise there's no eligibility criteria at all. Leah picked up some of the questions already. I'll try to go back up to the start. I think actually I'm just going to throw out a general question about coefficient of performance. The 360% efficient, Nick or Doug, without going into too much detail, sort of how do we get to that figure? Is that a yearly average? Does that mean keeping the heat pump on through July and August when possibly you might not be? But if it is, does that include provision of hot water as well as heat?
Yeah, I mean, there is complicated diagrams behind those figures, and we actually got to submit them to what's called like MCS, the micro certification scheme. So they are sort of fully endorsed and checked by them. And yeah, I'm trying to think back if it actually includes hot water on that one. I'm not sure it entirely does, but I can probably provide a bit of a graph to show exactly the sort of SCOP. But yeah, SCOP means like seasonal, so it is over the full calendar year. A few years back, we used to just have what was called like COP, like COP, and that was almost a bit like what car manufacturers do with sort of running costs and energy efficiency, like sort of to get so many miles per gallon, but it's a bit like factory scenario. Whereas now I've got to do a seasonal one, so it's like a true figure that we expect to get over the full year, obviously incorporating this colder months and the warmer months. But yeah, we're pretty sort of confident with those figures. It will differ depending on the big sort of changes that it's designed around like flow rates. So that 360 is at like 45 degrees, which is like the sort of optimal efficiency. But the new monoblock that Leah showed, that can actually run up to sort of 60 degrees. So it's a bit of a payoff really on exactly how you want your temperatures run through the property, and it will drop off a little bit, but it isn't as much as you think. So I think to run at 50 degrees rather than 45 degrees, it's something like 0.1 of a difference. So it'll be like 3.5 rather than 3.6. So it's not a huge amount, but yeah, there's a full chart and graph showing exactly where all these figures come from. So I can bore you if you want to see more detail quite happily.
Okay, and could you say a little bit about hot water production? Because a lot of us, I suppose, have got used to having a combi boiler, gas combi boiler, meaning instant production of hot water when we need it and no hot water cylinder. So I understand that would change with a heat pump.
Yes, it's probably one of the obviously we talk about like barriers to sort of heat pump growth really, and one of the ones is sort of how hot water is sort of dealt with. And yeah, typical heat pump install would need hot water cylinder, which is obviously different to a gas boiler where it's very much instantaneous. And how it works is that the heat pump itself would heat that hot water up. It will be in a super insulated cylinder, so it would stay hot for the vast majority of the day. You would probably need to sort of boost it up in terms of temperature in the morning and the evening, but other than that, it would be sort of cylinder that would be full of hot water on demand. And then it does have a sort of what's called like a backup immersion, which is like an electric, like not renewable immersion in there. And again, historically, that would have to be used once a week just to take it up to that Legionella cycle. So you've got to put almost a protection in there just to make sure that the water doesn't get any sort of chemicals and bacteria. So you'd have to sort of run that immersion. But other than that, the heat pump itself does all the hot water, heats that cylinder up properly. And it does that sort of fairly efficiently. What we have got as a product is like a hybrid heat pump. And this has been really popular across England and Scotland over the past couple of years. And it's essentially, again, without getting into loads of detail, it's essentially a boiler and a heat pump. There's a very clever control in the middle where you put your current gas price in and your current electric price in, and then the heat pump itself works out what's the most optimum technology to use. So during your spring, summer, autumn months, it'll be full heat pump. Once it starts getting cold, it would use probably a mix of both. So maybe if it starts a day where it's like 0 degrees outside, the boiler would kick in, and then during the day as it sort of warmed up, the heat pump would come in. And then in the very depths of winter, when it's below freezing most of the day, the boiler would do it all. But the big benefit of not with a hybrid is that you don't have to have a cylinder. So you could essentially set your boiler up to do with the hot water. So we've got quite a few clients we're working with who are fitting hybrids purely just for the fact that they don't have to have a hot water cylinder. They want the boiler to do that. So that's quite a common solution at the moment for somebody who's keen on sort of moving into the sort of heat pump world, but doesn't want to go fully heat pump.
Yeah.
But like you do with the electric cars and then hybrid cars. But it is a good solution for, I mean, there's lots of new innovations out there with sort of thermal stores, and we've got various kind of batteries which can run water through as well. So there's various bits of technology out there. But
okay, I'm going to move on. There's quite a few questions here.
Yeah.
Planning. We talked about planning a little bit. As I understood it, permitted development still covers it. Are there any planning constraints we should be thinking about? Particularly, I'm wondering about listed buildings or conservation areas.
Yeah, they would need full planning. Yeah, the permitted development doesn't include like listed buildings or conservation areas. They just always need that. And to be honest, we will probably, I mean, Leah talked about split systems and monoblocks, and that's probably where you would use a split system where you probably couldn't through planning, but you probably wouldn't want to fit a heat pump onto a beautiful stone built building anyway. But obviously, if you had like an outhouse or a shed in the back garden, you can just shift that heat pump off the building further down the garden.
Yeah.
So yeah, just different heat pump.
Okay, so on the split system, we've got a comment really from Andy. He says, are there any requirements to insulate the refrigerant pipes? Mine were not, leading to warming my path rather than warming the house. I retrofitted insulation of the pipes under the ground to save more money. So that's a useful tip.
Yeah, I mean, they should be insulated, bottom line. Yeah, Leah, Doug might have a better answer than me, but yeah, they should always be insulated. I mean, they can go up to like 30 meters away from the property, so they will retain all that heat if they're properly insulated.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, fine. Do you recommend installation of a heat meter in the flow line? And do you have an app which can be accessed by third-party software for monitoring key things such as flow and return temperatures, power draw, flow rate, etc.? Doug, are you going to pick that up?
Yeah, we do have an app that we can use that monitors the kilowatts the heat pump's using and generating. You can install a heat meter. It's not something you have to do. We used to do it with the hybrids because that was for the scheme at the time. But you don't need that now, so because the hybrids aren't on the bus scheme. So there's no real need to put a heat meter. The unit itself through the app can tell you how many kilowatts it's generating and all that itself.
Okay, great. Then a question that I found interesting. Richard has a property with an old gas blown air heating system, so no radiators. So he sort of retrofitted a heat pump to that system and finds it really effective. It was cheaper to install in this way. It heats up rooms quickly in the winter and cools well in the summer. Any thoughts on that? Is that a good way to go?
Yeah, that's a really good way to go. The centre we have in Worcester, we've actually connected the heat pump to, it's called a Unico system. It's not our product, but it's an emitter that delivers heat and cooling through air instead of a wet system. So you just have a flow and return going to your attic where the Unico system sits, and then the rest is done through air blowers in each room. Really good on bungalows. When we start retrofitting that in houses that haven't had a warm air system, we have to get the ducting in to do that. It is possible, and yeah, absolutely. If it was down to me, that would probably be the way I would be going as well. Yeah.
Right. So Richard's question is what are the advantages of heating via radiators? It sounds like you're saying the advantage is actually
no, we would have to. The problem with radiators, there's nothing wrong with radiators. We'd have to increase the size of the rads because they're working at a lower flow temperature. But having an air system means you don't have to have the radiators and it frees up more space. But the disadvantages of that, installing an air system into a property like a retrofit that hasn't already got one, you've got large amounts of ducting that you'll need to install. So the installation cost would be quite expensive. They've done them on bungalows I know Devon Council has moved over to these where they've installed these sort of Unico systems with our heat pump in bungalows, because that's dead simple to do it, the retrofit side of it. So there's no disadvantage to RADs, but there is an advantage if you could get the air system in there, meaning you just won't need radiators.
Yeah, and I'm sure the majority of people listening to this call have already got radiators and would be looking to keep them. So a question that often comes up is combining air source heat pump with solar. So John's specific circumstances are not only has he got 3.4 kilowatt hours of ground mounted solar PV, he's also got a 5 kilowatt hour battery. So to what degree is it possible to run the heat pump off the solar without having to import electricity?
Do you want to take that one, Nick?
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, it's a brilliant solution, it really is. So if you've got a heat pump and PV, so yeah, PV systems have come right back in favour again now because obviously the energy crisis and the cost of buying electricity. So yeah, as brilliant as PV systems are generating electricity, if you're not in the home to use them, then all that'll just get lost. So yeah, you do need to divert any unused energy from the panels into the property, and you can definitely do that with the heat pump. Yeah, so all you would do is you've got a little control, a little device in the middle that just diverts it. There's some systems out there that'll divert it to the hot water cylinder, but really you want to divert it to the heat pump, and then you go back into the sort of 360% efficient cycle. So if you think you're getting free energy from the sun, from the panels, the home isn't using it, and then it comes back around to the front of the heat pump, and then it gets tripled. So you're tripling your free energy essentially. So yeah, it's a bit of a no-brainer. It can be done fairly easily, and if you've got a battery, even better, because you just draw down anything that's going to be off-peak. When the government starts doing off-peak tariffs, again, you'll start to be able to draw down loads of free electricity through the night, or cheap electricity through the night, your free panels, and then use the heat pump from the battery. Yeah, so all that's possible, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Not directly comparing like with like, but just to flag up again, in 3 weeks' time, Dave Green is giving a talk about his air source heat pump and living with it in his home, because I mention it because I know he has solar panels on the house as well. So though I don't think he's got a battery, but in the shoulder seasons, sort of in the spring and the autumn, I know they've been successful at using the power from the panels to run the heat pump. So do come along to that if you can bear any more of this technical stuff. Right, next question. Right, we've got all sorts of comments about what size heat pumps people have got installed in their properties. So thank you very much for those. So back to the COP. Do Dakin produce a chart showing how the COP decreases with increased flow temperature differential to the outside air temperature?
Yes, all our units, we show all our SCOPs, everything. We've got charts for every unit we do. So all that information is available, yeah.
Okay. Sorry, back on the planning question. Leah, do we know how far away does the unit need to be from a window or a door opening?
Yeah, so there are some restrictions, but our units, because we use R32 refrigerant, have not got excessive clearances. I can't remember off the top of my head. Doug, would you be able to answer that? How far away from a window or a door, a neighbouring door?
Yeah, so if we're talking, I mean, like boiler flues have to be quite far away from windows and doors. With a heat pump, the only real window we're worried about is a bedroom window, and that's more to do with sound. But again, the sound levels have dropped so much since that regulation's come out. So it's about 1 metre from a bedroom window, and the clearance from a door to or another window is more for servicing clearance, so like 200-300 mil, depending on the unit. So it's not massive.
Okay. Yeah, comment from Delia. I don't really notice the noise of the pump unless I'm outside standing next to it.
Brilliant.
She also comments, however, my bills have increased even prior to the increase in prices.
Yeah. So that's two good points. I mean, the heat pumps really have dropped in noise level now 10 years ago, they were noisy. Now you really can't hear them. All you can really hear is the air flowing through the grills. So the noise level isn't so much of an issue. If the costs have gone up since having a heat pump fitted, I would want to be checking with the installer what the heat loss was, the calculations, making sure the design of the installation was right. Because as we've touched on in the presentation, with the heat pumps, it all comes down to the design. If there's something not right with that design, or the pipework's not insulated like the last one, we're losing heat. So we'd need that installation to be checked to make sure it is 100%, and therefore that would show any discrepancies.
Sure. Okay, thank you for that. Potentially a bit more tricky one. This question is about intermittent use of a building. Say 2 days per week. What would you recommend for efficient usage?
So that's a good question. So we have some customers who have heat pumps fitted in holiday lets, and obviously people aren't always in the holiday lets. With all our heat pumps, they work with our Madoka stats, which are internet controlled. So you could turn these on and off by your phone. What we don't want to do with when we're running a heat pump, like we discussed, we don't want the house to drop to an extremely cold level and then bring it back up again, because we're creating sharp heat curves. So we would have an off and on temperature, and probably an off temperature of around 17 degrees and then an on temperature of 21 would just balance that out. So we wouldn't want to completely turn it off, but dropping that set point down would just help keep it more efficient.
Okay. Right, I have a question here from Nancy about MVHR. I should again plug the Green Doors event. I went to see a property here in Shrewsbury on Saturday, which has been it's had a deep retrofit, so a lot of fabric first attention. Its thermal performance is much better than it used to be. So it has an MVHR system, which is required because it's now so airtight. But it also has an air source heat pump to sort of top up the heating levels as and when they're required. So Nancy's question, which I think I've endeavored to answer, is do they work well with an MVHR system? I suspect the answer is probably yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Go on, Ian.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, absolutely. We do quite a lot of new build designs where they add in MVHR, and we've got various amounts of products and partners that do those types of products as well. So yeah, the simple answer is yes, absolutely.
I'm sorry, just for everyone's benefit, as I'm sure you know, that means mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. Very useful question from Dot. Thank you for asking that. How long would it be before the system needs to be replaced? Can you say a little bit about sort of servicing and maintenance, and how long does that take before things start to need replacement, and indeed how much would it cost?
So the good news is once you have a heat pump, replacing it's a lot easier than the original retrofit going from gas to a heat pump. We sort of stipulate our heat pumps the design life up to 10 to 15 years, with a recommendation it's serviced yearly. So very similar to a boiler, just when it comes to replacing that heat pump, it really is, if it's a monoblock, it's potentially just one off, one on, 2 flow and return pipes. So the second cost of the installation is a lot less than the first, because we're not having to rip up the whole house and change pipe sizes and stuff like that.
Okay, back to the coefficient of performance again here. Does the air source heat pump have a better seasonal coefficient of performance with underfloor heating? In this case, how can summer cooling be solved? Any experience with ceiling heating or cooling? Can you pick up all of that?
I think the SCOP I don't think is based on the actual heat pump itself, as opposed to what emitters you've got. But I think what this might sort of answer the question. A heat pump, we do definitely recommend underfloor heating. I'd say the majority of new builds now where we're fitting heat pumps, they are going underfloor heating downstairs and radiators upstairs, because you need a larger surface area when you're working with a lower temperature. Basically, you get more bang for your buck out of your heating if you've got a larger surface area, which is why we recommend larger radiators. So if you've got underfloor heating, you're able to heat a larger area a lot lot quicker. So underfloor heating definitely does make things a lot more efficient. And also the underfloor heating runs at a much lower temperature. So you're actually being a lot more efficient straight away with using the underfloor heating. In answer to the question about cooling, for cooling, we wouldn't recommend using a wet system because I think, as somebody's alluded to, you get condensation. So if you wanted to have cooling, you would either have to have the air-to-air heat pump, so you've got no wet system at all for your heating, you've got fan convectors. If you wanted to have still a wet system, but then maybe 1 or 2 rooms you wanted to have some cooling in, then you'd have to have some fan convectors fitted just in those particular rooms as opposed to in the whole property.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you very much. So Janet's question about the running costs slide, perhaps we need to bring it up again. It says, is it typical annual kilowatt hours of 12,000 kilowatt hours, the amount of electricity a heat pump would cost to run? If so, please explain the adjusted amount you have used to calculate the annual cost.
Yeah, I mean, 12,000 kilowatts, just like, I think it was taken from the Energy Saving Trust, is just a typical household would use that much energy throughout the year. So that's just an average figure from that, the Energy Saving Trust, I think. And the adjusted amount, so yeah, so I suppose the big one is gas boilers and 90% of heat pumps are 360. So the 360 is the S-COP that we've been talking about. So yeah, if you increase the temperature of the water running around the heat pump, it might be 3.5, not 3.6. And the boiler really depends on how old the boiler is. So yeah, as I mentioned, like a 25-year-old boiler will be 60% efficient, not 90. And if it's a 5-year-old boiler you're taking out, it could be 95, 96%. I think all new boilers installed in the last 10 or 12 years couldn't be sort of sold less than 90%. So yeah, most boilers would be looking to take out to be around that sort of 90%. But yeah, I mean, everything's like able to be sort of delved into a bit, and we can show sort of charts and graphs on where the efficiencies come from. But yeah, they're just almost for like demonstration purposes, just to show that yeah, heat pumps are like cheaper to run than gas boiler.
Okay, yeah, if we could, well, I'm sure we can arrange this afterwards. If we could talk about some further materials and the chart that we discussed and give access to people, that would be brilliant. Suzanne is asking, what is the smallest hot water cylinder you can have?
In terms of volume, sorry, go on, Doug, I'll let you answer that then.
Well, the question really would be, what is the hot water demand on your property? You could buy a hot water cylinder that's 90 litres, but is that actually going to be enough for what you need? We sell a 150 litre cylinder, but these cylinders are quick recovery, so they're unvented cylinders, so they can actually heat up quite quickly with the heat pump because they're so well insulated. But that would be sized on the heat loss, so how many people are living in the property, how many bathrooms we've got. Then we determine what size cylinder. The smallest is a 150 that we sell, and I really wouldn't want to be going under that. So I'd say 150 would be the smallest if it was a 2-bed house with 2 people living in it.
Okay, thanks very much. Just a point for clarification, this is from Jackie. As I understand it, the hybrid boiler heat pump system doesn't qualify for the bus.
It's a shame. Nick, I don't know, have you heard any more on that? Is that changing, or is that?
No, you're right. I mean, at the moment it doesn't qualify, but I know governments are looking quite closely at that because they do very much favour hybrid heat pumps. To be honest, they're a little bit nervous about misuse. So what they don't want to do is pay £5,000 for a hybrid system, and then somebody gets the new boiler and heat pump and then just turns the heat pump off. And essentially, it's just running the gas boiler, and that's what they guard against really. So they're a little bit nervous about funding something funding like a low carbon scheme to try and encourage movement away from gas, and then somebody just leaves the gas boiler on. But they are working quite closely with us in terms of hybrid funding. And some of the new government funds that just come out earlier, the 1.5 billion I mentioned, do support hybrids. So yeah, they're very much still supported. But yeah, bus at the moment doesn't.
Okay, we're running a little short of time. I think we've still got questions coming in, so do get them in if you want to ask something. Is annual maintenance recommended or necessary?
Yeah, we do recommend it. Yearly maintenance, and that can be done by your installer, it can be done by the manufacturer. but it is recommended, yeah.
Okay. I'll ask, so if you're getting an installer round and getting various quotes from different installers, what would be some of the key questions to ask them?
Sorry, I missed that. It broke up slightly.
Sorry, what would be the key questions to ask the installer when they come round to quote for your new heat pump?
Yeah, so this is really important. The installer is extremely important when we're installing a heat pump. So you might want to ask them, are they MCS qualified, which means that they're very much aware of how heat pump installations work. You might want to check with the manufacturer of the heat pump if they're approved. So all our installers have to go on training before we can approve them, so we know they've been vetted by Daikin. You want to ask them what the heat loss was. Can you see the heat loss? Can you see the figures? They should share that data with you. What other heat pump installations they've probably done, it's worth asking. Just all those sort of things really, and just making sure they're approved by the manufacturer and MCS would be a very good start. Yeah.
Right, apparently I misunderstood Andrew's question about third-party access to monitoring flow and return temperatures and such things through an application programming interface, not through an app. So my apologies.
Yeah, I'll see this one, Doug.
Yeah, go ahead, Nick. Go.
Yeah, the problem is we do have an API. Yes, so we've got a team in Europe and Belgium who are like European Development Centre. So yeah, we do have an API that was shared between third-party devices. So
okay.
For example, we're working with Switch at the moment, who are a third-party controller. We've got an API which allows cloud-to-cloud interface. So yeah, we do.
Okay, couple of fairly basic questions. Why does the unit have to be outside? And can we talk about replacing radiators? You are implying they need replacing, but it isn't always the case. So could you help us with that?
the heat pump needs to go outside because we need new air basically. If we were to, because we get often quite asked, can we fit it in the loft, because the loft is warm, people assume that, but we can't be recycling that air. If the heat pump keeps recycling air, it will then eventually freeze, because the air that's coming out the front is very, very cold. So if we're just recycling that same air over and over again, like in a loft space, for example, then it will just freeze up. So we need new air. So it does need to be outside. But as we mentioned before, that there is flexibility in where outside you can put the heat pump. In terms of the next question, sorry, Tony, can you just go over the next question again?
It's the radiators.
Radiators, yeah. Go on.
So that's a really good point. I was on a heat loss with an installer a couple of weeks ago where we'd done the heat loss and we didn't need to change the radiators because the previous installer had oversized them, which is something that does happen. But you can only determine that if you've done a heat loss. Once you've done a heat loss, you'll know which rooms need radiators increasing, and it is shocking how many rads are already oversized. And if that's the case, that's great, because it will bring the install cost down. So.
Okay. Here's another interesting one. Are there any homes or situations where you would not recommend an air source heat pump? This is going to bring out your true colors, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, any house that's not insulated or has got solid stone walls, what you've got to think of is the heat pump isn't generating heat, it's moving heat. So we need to keep a house insulated, just like your fridge. If your fridge door's open, it's going to cost you more money to run. That's the same as a heat pump. So if it's an old Victorian building with solid stone walls, single glazed windows, the first thing you need to be doing is looking at the insulation, not the heat source. And that would be the same if you were fitting a boiler as well. You wouldn't want to fit a boiler in a property like that if it's not insulated. So we need to look at the insulation.
Okay, yep, great, thank you for that. Can I just ask a clarification about cooling? I picked up, Leah, you were saying it basically doesn't work with a wet system. Is that the case? Can you, Gemma's asking, you can't use rads to be
No,
cold?
yeah. Well, there's two reasons for that. So, firstly, if you're putting hot water through a radiator, that's gonna heat up a room a lot quicker than it would cool down a room if it had cold water in it. So it's not going to work very well in terms of cooling. And secondly, you're going to get condensation, so you're going to get water dripping out the bottom of your radiators. So it's not something that we recommend. It's not something that we suggest as a solution. It can be done, but it's not effective way of doing things. So like we mentioned before, you'd either need to go completely what we call air-to-air heat pump. So you remove all of your wet radiators and pipe work and have fan convectors. So your heating and cooling is through fan convectors, no radiators, no water system. Or if you did want to have just 1 or 2 rooms, which is quite popular at the moment, for just the bedrooms, you can have it connected up to the heat pump so that you've got just those fan convectors in the bedrooms. But I think we'd need to make sure there's some sort of shut off valves in the system to make sure that cooling doesn't go through to the radiators in the summer months.
Okay, I think we'll just wrap up with a comment from Dave. Many thanks, need to go now, interesting stuff. I think that pretty much covers it. We're just about out of time, so I will hand over to no, I won't. Another important point has just come up from Paul. Thank you for that. It's not just about replacing radiators, because there's also pipe work that needs to be replaced occasionally. Leah, Doug, could you pick that one up? When do we need to change our pipe work?
So that is a fair point. Again, it all depends on the heat loss, because if we've got a bigger heat pump, 22 mil pipe is not going to be enough flow to get the temperature through, which is why the flow and returns to the cylinder would be 35 mil. That being said, on some installations, smaller houses where we've got 4 or 5 kilowatts, you do a calculation and work it out, but you probably will get away with 22. But the majority of the cases will be increasing the flow and return, not the pipes to the rads, just the flow and return to the cylinder to 35 mil.
Right, so just the flow and return pipes from the unit to the hot water cylinder would need replacing, not the rest of the pipework around the house connecting.
No, as long as we've got 15 mil pipe work to the rads, which is pretty standard, that's enough. If it's micro bore, that would need to be looked at to the radiators. But the flow and return, 9 times out of 10 on the retrofit, it's going to have to be 35 mil.
Right, great, well done. There's all sorts of interesting questions there. So thank you to the questioners and thank you to the answerers. Well done, you guys. And I'll just hand back to Jackie to wrap things up.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Nice job with the questions, Tony, and thank you very much to the team from Daikin, because we really appreciate that 3 of you from the national team really have taken time out of your working day as part of this educational program on heat pumps, so that really is terrific. Thank you everyone who's taken part, and as we said, we will be sending you through a follow-up email. There will be a link to this event, the recording of this event, once we've got that prepared. It usually does take a few days, and also information about the green doors that Tony and others have mentioned. That's a really nice chance to actually go and see homes with technology like this installed. And as the Dakin team have said, that all important insulation. In fact, no matter what you're heating with, just insulate better. Great. So unless anybody can remind me of something I've forgotten, I'll just say thank you very much. I think the organising team will stay behind, but to everybody else, thank you so much for spending your lunchtime with us, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.